So in step number one, we identified what the mission of your escape room activity is. In my example, for the space race lesson, I identified that my juniors needed to know the key events and the turning points. And they also needed to know how the space race connected to Cold War tensions. Next, I want to further break that down into manageable chunks for students. Now, based on TEKS and performance standards, I found 3 steps from the space race my students needed to understand. You might have fewer steps or more than me. Just note, these are steps you expect students to learn in that lesson today. So notice my steps won't mention anything about the Cold War itself or what communism is. They would have already learned that in previous lessons. So using my example, I decided my students needed to take away 3 things. They needed to know that the Soviet launch of the satellite Sputnik 1 started the space race. They need to know that the US was behind the Soviets for most of this time. And while they don't necessarily need to know specifics here, I will use the examples of the Vanguard TV3 satellite, which was America's response to Sputnik, and it blew up on the launch pad, and also Yuri Gagarin, who's the first man in space, who's, of course, from the Soviet Union. Finally, they will need to know that Apollo 11 was the US mission led by NASA that put Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon. At this point, I would take a moment to review your step number 2 and make sure that what you're asking students to learn from this activity is reasonable. And if you haven't already, jot it down because you will need it for a future step.